So there's a saber rattling from Donald Trump, our president-elect, who will soon take office, that he wants to take over Greenland and Canada, either by force or economic force. We need to talk about this in more detail, Lucas. This can't be real, right? We're not really going to make all of these places part of the United States, are we? Is this the burgeoning of the next empire? Are we becoming the next Great Britain here to expand our borders and our influence and take over everything that is North America and make it all America?
Well, I think it depends on how we look at it.
Well, we're looking at it like all this yellow is going to be our territory, right? What was that thing about giving back Alaska too? Wasn't there some talk about that at one point?
Oh no, we're giving back Alaska. We're giving Alaska to Russia so we can drill for oil there again.
Yeah, I don't understand that part. There's no way we're giving up Alaska.
Because we steal other countries' oil.
You guys have paid Canada to keep Alaska secure for how long? You're now just going to give it away?
Welcome, Fresh, by the way, everyone. This is Fresh Bueller.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Friend of the show.
Thanks for coming on the show.
A Canadian. I don't want to dox you too much, Fresh, but a Canadian here for the Canadian perspective. How's it going?
Going great, man. Going great. Just excited about the United States of North America, you know?
You're excited about the troops that you're expecting in the streets of Canadian cities and
absolutely. I mean, listen, I could use the help here in Canada, right? Like our economy's trash. I don't really think you guys want us, but it's going to be great for me.
Well, wait a minute now. Justin Trudeau is out, right? So is the next person who's going to take the reins, is he going to go along with this deal? It's what's his name from the Shark Tank is going to be your next president, right?
No, Kevin O'Leary wants the annexation to happen, but I actually don't think that any Canadian leader is just going to be like, yeah, no problem, we're going to join you guys. So
is Poliver, can you help me with his name? I've only read it. Polyev? Of course it is. That's so French. Is he going to be, I mean, do all signs point to Polyev as the next prime minister for Canada, or is that just preference on who I'm seeing as the candidate?
So from my everyday life, it does seem like he is the preference. However, with Justin stepping down, I'm a little worried about that. Because I wonder if they're going to try to frame it like, oh, it was his fault, but liberals still good. And then all the socialist Canadians are just like, okay, we'll give you guys another chance. And I don't think Canada lives through it.
Well, and issues at hand in Canada. I mean, I know you guys have nationalized healthcare. Canadians very proud of that. I've seen that in several posts in the wake of Donald Trump statements calling Trudeau the governor of the great state of Canada, which was actually pretty funny trolling. But also, I hear that immigration has been top topic in our last election here in the United States, and I hear so in Canada. What else is going on up there? What are on people's minds? What are they voting about?
It's the housing crisis. I feel like Canada's housing crisis is the hot button topic, and it's definitely what the liberals keep pushing to be the voting factor is a housing crisis. However, I don't think anybody really has a plan on fixing it. So I think it's like a farce that everybody claims to be voting on the housing crisis, but there's no real plans.
So Canada is technically a protectorate of Great Britain, right? I mean, we'd have to fight them again to take this off of their books, right?
Well, you'd at least have to talk to the king. We are definitely, like, when you go to court in Canada, it's versus the king. So
yeah, I mean, Canada is a part of Great Britain. So if we're talking about like taking this over, it's like this is the next American Revolution or something.
Well, so I mean, this also, there's all these claims of American imperialism. Oh my God, Donald Trump is making unbelievable statements. I don't go too deep into that. But at the same time, like, how much sense does it make that Canada is part of the British Commonwealth, and that Greenland is a colony of Denmark? You know, the
Well, I'd say at
European
least for
nations.
Canada, it makes no sense to be part of Britain at all. Um, but I think for Greenland, I'm not sure that the US really has a stake other than like we have a deal with them already, right? And being allowed to be there and do basically whatever the fuck we want.
Well, and I'm thinking also in as we see the the NATO Russia war being fought in Ukraine winding to an end, and NATO losing that war. Turkey and Israel beginning to fight over Syria, and that not playing well with the other members of NATO. Like Turkey's always been the redheaded stepchild of NATO to begin with, and I think we're going to see, you know, I think we're going to see a lot more strife going on with that alliance over there, and we're already seeing that Europe is very reliant on, excuse me, on cheap Russian gas. Um, uh, I'm sorry, Canada. Britain, the UK has been devastated by their economy has been devastated by the lack of cheap energy, by the reduction in their empire throughout the world over time. I mean, they've been hanging on ever since World War II by their legacy in the most part. So, um, when I think about those aspects, and also these European countries contributing to 2% of the budget of NATO, I I wonder how much sense it makes for the United States to continue that, especially if the existence of NATO, like, means that there's some inevitable conflict that's coming with Russia. I'd rather we gave up NATO and focused on securing relations with our neighbors. And in some ways, I think Donald Trump is making grandiose statements to open people's mind to what it might look like to have better relations, or harder and more important bargains and conversations to be had with our neighbors, from Greenland all the way down to Panama.
Yeah, I think the problem is that you're scaring everybody, right? Because a lot of people voted for Trump because they thought the left was well, a globalist faction, right? And then the minute that Trump gets in, he's like, well, I want the Panama Canal. I want the Gulf of Mexico. I want Greenland. I want Canada. It's looking very globalist, right? So a lot of people that were pro Trump during the election are starting to now get scared away and thinking, maybe this is not a good idea. So I'm not sure that the trade off is worth it if you're scaring your people who are already your constituents.
Well, and I'm likewise a little bit scared, but I also look at other things that Trump has said. I mean, yesterday he tweeted out Jeffrey Sachs, and Jeffrey Sachs, and it was a clip of Jeffrey Sachs laying out that the wars that we've engaged in the Middle East were more so to Israel's interest than American interests or the United States interests, and that gave me, I mean, I'm like, Trump also in his campaign talked about how he likes to how he's a good bargainer and how it's important to come to the table with force. But I I do hope that that's a lot of bluster on his part, and we focus on trade relations and also opening up movement. You know, ideally, what I think this would look like is something like the European Schengen agreement for the countries of North America, everybody from Panama all the way to Greenland. Um, and I think that is something that would play well with all of those countries. I mean, we all like our identities and our multiple identities, the national identities of our countries, but we also like to move around. And um, we used to be able to move fairly freely back and forth across the southern border of the United States into Mexico, but a lot of that movement has been restricted. I'm not near the northern border between Canada and the United States, but I think that Americans and Canadians, or sorry, United States citizens, whatever, and Canadians would be much happier being able to move back and forth without having to go through some sort of checkpoint and political process.
Well,
And
I know that like we
it's
used to be able to drive through with just our license. Like I'd go to the border at Niagara Falls and I'd drive to Buffalo, and it wasn't even like they would take the license and scan it and whatever. You just flash the license to them and they're like, "Oh, okay, cool, Canadian guy," and they let you go. And I mean, I used to go to the States a lot more when that was the case, right? And I was happier with it, so for sure.
I'd agree with that. It used to be very common. Like Canadians would come down to the United States and they'd go grocery shopping and go back. They'd come down here and shop in the United States. I mean, it was very common. And I live right on the border of Canada, and I'll tell you one thing: there is no patrol. There is no Royal Canadian Mounted Police. There's nothing there. I mean, you can just walk across the border. It's not like this is controlled. I mean, sure, if you want to drive across, there's a checkpoint and you're going to have to do stuff. But if you go even 2 miles to the side of it, you just walk right around that border. I mean, it's there's no control. There's no wall.
well, and we've had NAFTA since the '90s, North American Free Trade Agreement. You know, I know Trump made claims as to he was making a better deal for America with the what was it the Canadian American Mexico agreement. I forget what it was. Whatever. The the UCM agreement that he made in retooling NAFTA during his first administration. But regardless, whenever Trump started talking about tariffs and slapping tariffs on countries around the world and using tariffs to fund the federal government in replacing the income tax on Americans, Justin Trudeau got on a plane and flew to Mar-a-Lago, and and he was very concerned with what Canada was going to do without, or if that trade embargo or trade tariffs were placed on Canada, and how that would affect the Canadian economy. So I think that we also should think about, we live in a world now where we trade all around the globe, and I hear people talk about, well, this is a globalist agenda from somebody who campaigned on being a nationalist. But trading with Canada and with Mexico makes more sense to me than trading with countries that we have to ship and rely on shipping and transit from all over the globe.
Well, the
So
problem becomes like adding these tariffs when we have this free trade agreement doesn't just harm Canadians. Like we, just as an example, we give soft lumber for $1. You take it, turn it into a chair and sell it for 10. Like, if that can't happen anymore, it's going to affect Americans. It's not just going to affect Canadians. In fact, we'll just make plants and process it ourselves, right? Like, I don't know that these tariffs on such a close neighbor makes sense. But what do I know?
Well, you're 100. You know a lot, and you're 100% right that tariffs hurt both. You know, we talk about and hold with respect this notion of free trade, because trading with our neighbors establishes relationships that are much more beneficial to both parties. But there's more that's going on, because the United States has done, you know, is does not just have the idea of tariffs in our mind. We already have sanctions against many countries throughout the world, and whenever the world had to rely on trade through the United States dollar, and we were a much more dominant economy and a dominant force throughout the world, other countries didn't have a lot of options to get around those sanctions. But we've come to a point where sanctioning, you know, half of the population in 40 different countries throughout the world is isolating the United States more so than we are isolating various countries from international and global trade.
Well, I when I think about tariffs, I think not just about like what they do particularly as far as it can hurt things, but it's a tool of statecraft, right? I mean, a lot of industries have nation state backing. Like I think about the BYD car manufacturer as one of the canonical examples of this. China, as a nation state, could just decide, hey, we want BYD to be like the car company across the entire planet. And so we're going to just dump resources into it to destroy competition. And we'll just view that as an investment for a significant period of time. And until we crush everybody else that was trying to make, you know, electric cars, then all that competition will be gone, and then we'll own the market globally, and that'll be it. It'll be over. So for the United States to put a tariff on BYD cars and say, we don't want those here, and if you try to bring them into the market, they're going to be prohibitively expensive, it makes some amount of sense to do that. So the selective utilization of tariffs seems like, you know, it's a tool of statecraft. Am I thinking about it right?
I mean, absolutely. And I think the problem that, or the reason that this is being forced as a solution now, is that rather than solve issues, internal issues of what the distribution of I don't know, the appropriated assets of a country are, we've relied on this notion of, oh, we can use organizations called corporations to reach around the world and to draw more in. But other countries are playing that game, and playing it maybe better than the United States, because they're because maybe they've solved a bit of the internal struggle problem, and I'm thinking of China here. Um, but no, I think you're thinking about that absolutely right. You know, China. I also wanted to point out that China has in December of last year, so long ago, early December 3rd of last year, China banned the export of many minerals to the United States. And they did so under the reasoning that the United States was manufacturing weapons and could possibly use those weapons to defend Taiwan. And Taiwan is by international agreement, a Chinese island, in which there is a rogue, uh, a rebel government, but that rebel government uh, is not the official ruler of that land. And so China used that logistic and the changed balance of power between them and the United States throughout the world to say, we're not going to send all these weapons to the United States anymore. And then at January the 2nd, the start of this year, they banned or they sanctioned, I forget what the number of companies are, something like 30 or 40 companies, American companies that are engaged in what we call national defense, but engaged in the creation of weapons, and under the same reasoning. The United States is shipping those weapons to countries around the world, and one of those countries is Taiwan, and so they're not going to participate in that in the creation of those weapons anymore. So this is also why I think the United States, why Donald Trump is very interested in Canada and Greenland. They have a lot of land. There's a lot of resources that are in that land. And
see, but I think that they should just be focusing on ways to get around it, because I actually think that this is a good idea of China, but I also think it's good for the states, because I think what it does is it causes the states to have to innovate. We don't have access to these minerals. We don't have access to these things. So what else can we use? What else can we do? I think that it's a good thing overall, barring the FAA. Like, I think that if you get rid of the FAA, it would be an even better thing and there'd be even more innovation. But again, I think that this is a good thing overall for the US. Figure out how to rely on itself.
And when you say FAA, do you mean the Federal Aviation Administration?
Yeah.
Or is that some Canadian organization?
No, the FAA.
Okay. Well, and we've already, after the COVID lockdowns and the quote unquote supply chain issues after COVID, the United States could see this on the horizon. What was the first legislation here after COVID was, before the Inflation Reduction Acts, there was the CHIPS Act, and the United States put a lot of money into creating microchips here in the United States because it also became apparent that our influence in Asia and our reliance on chip production in Korea and Taiwan was insecure, and so we've ramped up chip production here in the United States. It's nowhere near what China's capacity or sophistication of their chip production is, but we are making moves there, and I think this is a good thing for Americans because we have these numbers that economists trot out about what the gross national product is of America. I'm assuming it's also similar for Canada, but we do not have broad industry. Whenever we were in the business of managing the money for the rest of the world, our physical industries took a toll, and everything from resource extraction to manufacturing. So if we bring some of those industries back, we begin to open up the options for American politicians and governments to use for, again, distributing the wealth of America. And right now, you got to play the stock market or own real estate. And Fresh, you mentioned the housing crisis in Canada. We have the same housing crisis here in the United States, and that has a lot to do with how our financial system is stacked. And
it has to do with bureaucracy. It's all about bureaucracy. It's all about redundancy. It's all about the fact that to get one house built that costs $500,000, there's $900,000 worth of bureaucrats that have to be paid, and they're all redundant. They all check the same thing. They all say yes to the same thing just to collect a paycheck. So it costs $1.5 million or more to build a $500,000 home.
Well, I think that's part of it, but there's also a part of it that is that has to do with whenever we have a class of people who already own their home and begin buying more and realize that the inflation of the inflation of the dollar is pegged to the value of the assets of Americans, from our jobs to our houses. You can own companies, you can own other people's jobs and be pegged to inflation in that way, or you can own houses. And many people have figured out that they could own houses, and that they could also abuse the government taxing reliance on the jobs, jobs as assets, the income tax, and take advantage of lower property taxes. Here in the United States, we have many states and the federal government funded by income tax, and that makes it a very attractive option to go out and buy more real estate and charge rents, extract the money from from Americans, from citizens, or whomever it may be, through the rent that they have to pay every month. And so it's not an ideal situation for people in the United States or Canada.
But how do you fix it? Like, what, you know what I mean? Like, what's the option here? Because how do you have a free market and control housing? Like, you can't say like real estate can't be a business, like you can't be a landlord. Like, what, you know what I'm trying to say?
Well,
I think there's one thing you can easily do, which is just to say that there are certain types of real estate that should not be owned by certain types of entities. And there are always rules around that kind of stuff when you're talking about corporations. I mean, corporations frequently have different types of rules that they have to abide by. So just saying like, massive corporations like BlackRock can't own n number of single family dwellings, and with what they're doing with the beneficial ownership, it's a move in the direction of starting to make sure that the shell corporations game can't be used. So you could say, well, yeah, they're just going to have a company, and then that company is going to own the houses and blah blah blah, and there's going to be a way to just get around it. But there are structures that can be put in place and things can be done. So I mean, you could do something like that, just to say that there are certain types of assets that companies can't own.
But then does that end up with less people being able to rent? Because, for example, without a BlackRock, or you can even go smaller because BlackRock is a huge fucking holdings company. But without these people buying apartment buildings, building apartment buildings, we can't house enough people.
For sure. That's why I went after single family, like, because apartment buildings, different beast. It's like that.
Yeah, but like you need to buy up a block of single families in order to put up an apartment building sometimes. So like, how do you, again, it gets really sticky really quick.
Well, that has to do with zoning. Zoning's like a different beast. As far as what type of building can you put up, a lot of times the reason that you can't put up a certain type of building where you might want to put it up is because there are really bizarre zoning issues, and zoning issues are like a state and a county problem. I don't know. This feels like a solvable problem. It's just, I just don't think that there's a desire to solve it on the level of the powers that be, because there are not that many buckets of money to go after, and going after the place you live is one of the last buckets of money to go after. I mean, we already have retirement captured, so what's left? Housing.
Yeah, well, when you're playing at that level too, like it's kind of like owning a casino, right? The house always wins, so why would I ever want to give that up?
So ways to solve it. I think the best way to solve it is to begin to chip away at income tax, and to remove income tax from the methods that we use to fund the federal government and the state governments. And I know it sounds counterintuitive to say the answer is property tax, but the answer is property tax. Whenever we are funding the government based on property tax, that makes it in the interest of everyone, from corporations to people living in homes, to keep property tax and the amount of money that is stretched over the value of those assets, to keep that from being stretched too far.
Well, I actually agree with you, because I think that, again, like land is finite and not finite, and then we can just print some more. Like it's finite. So it definitely makes sense to have to pay tax on your land as opposed to tax on your income.
Well, and we even we need to also remember that we have land tax and we have property tax. and that we can tax different property based on what the use of that property is. Commercial property, single family residence. Maybe we want to incentivize apartments, or maybe we want to move away from landlords, move towards condominiums. I don't know what's the difference between a condo and an apartment. You actually own your condo. It's just it's shared in a building of people. But to me, that's so much of how we've fallen into a trap of relying on the idea of income tax to fund the government, and then separated a class of people who didn't rely on income tax and could inflate the value of assets, the banker class, the financial class. That's what we've fallen into. And we need to have politicians that structure government in a way to get us away from that. And Trump's talks about tariffs are very unpopular. They're unpopular with economists. They're unpopular with financial holding companies, equity companies. But that's because it's not a great deal for them. But I'm not interested in great deals for them. I'm worried about Americans who live in their homes. And Grant, you mentioned
they're used to filling their gullet, right? So they're just going to pass that on to us.
Yes, absolutely. And we can also take a look at who lives in a property. Just because people, or we're structuring government off of property tax, I'm totally behind notions of, if you hit 65, we have income tax, and we have Social Security that's carved out of that income, takes a cut out of your income whenever you have a job in the United States. I'm not sure how they do it in Canada, but I would be much more excited about, like, returning to reliance on property tax and saying whenever you hit certain age brackets, your property tax is at a lower rate. And that to me would make a lot more sense than some people, paying more throughout their working career, throughout their life, and maybe getting a benefit from that in the future, or maybe never getting to cash in on that because they die too early.
Well, maybe we could factor it in on like a per 100 years or per 50-year basis, where it's like the upkeep of this land and contribution to society over 50 years is going to cost this. We divide it over the 52 weeks of 50 years, and you pay $10 a week or something like that, and then in 50 years you look at, okay, well, this was the average cost of living, and this is what it would cost for the next 50 years. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And we haven't even, I mean, we also have vast resources that are underneath, or part of the land, throughout North America. It's going to be interesting to see how those resources are divided up as we return to a reliance on industry and resources that come from within our borders.
What do you think is the right way? Like, for example, in Arizona, like, you own the air above your house and you own the ground to the core. Do you think that is right, or do you think it's literally like the property you have on the land?
Well, I think those people who hold deeds have conveyed the right of ownership of the property on the land, but the property on the land is the things that have been created. When it goes to the resources, to the core of the earth, or to 400 feet over, which is generally what it is in most states in the United States. Well, I think we have to go back to the notions of who controls that land. Is it at the state? Is it at the federal government's level? Is it at the free trade level, or is it at the state or county level? I like the notion of counties control land, municipalities have a great deal of control of real estate or houses on that. But I think at the very least we should have different governments that are tied to the administration of especially those two items. And I think a lot about Alaska. You know, you mentioned Arizona. Arizona comes into the United States in 1850 after the Mexican-American War. You know, like encroaching on Canadian territories. And the first time we've done this in 1850, we started a war with Mexico after their civil war with Spain, or their war of independence with Spain, and while they were weak, and we took the northern territories from them.
And then 17 short years later, you took Alaska.
Well, we bought Alaska, but it was Abraham Lincoln's Secretary of either the Interior or Secretary of State, Seward, William Seward, I believe his name was, who bought that land. He was derided for buying Alaska at the time for his entire life. But
Seward's Folly.
Seward's Folly, yep. But look at the difference between Alaska and Arizona. Look at the difference between, you know, Tennessee, the states in the east, where, or even in Colorado. Who owns all of the resources and mineral rights in Colorado? Two mining companies, two massive mining companies. Who owns all the resources in Georgia and Tennessee? A couple of lumber companies. In Alaska, people who live in Alaska get part of the income off of the sale of oil in Alaska, and they don't see that as socialism. Like I hear all the time about like America needs to be wary of communism and socialism, or whatever word we tie onto sharing of a resource. But then whenever it comes to the dividends that come from the state-owned resources of Alaska, everybody seems a little bit jealous. So I think we need to take that
of
model.
The resources underground, Lucas. Do you know what tie this talk about Greenland has with resources under the ground? Is it that there are rare earth metals in Greenland that we're angling for? It was my understanding that thing's covered mostly with an ice sheet. What's the pull for Greenland?
Zinc, lead, gold, iron ore, and heavy and light rare earth elements, and then copper and oil.
Yes, all of those things. And not only that, but nobody living on top of them to make it to launch NIMBY arguments against the extraction of those resources.
And is Denmark right now actively harvesting those? Is that what's going on here, or is it just that they're lying fallow?
No, I don't know that Denmark's doing anything. Denmark, you know,
do they have the technology to get under that ice sheet?
Absolutely. The United States has a. Does Denmark? I mean, Denmark is a small country that's part of like the greater European experiment. The Euro experiment was created and is managed by the United States. That system is collapsing as we speak. You know, NATO was the post World War II leader of that experience that we piled the dollar, the Bretton Woods like trade system on top of that. That trade system collapsed in the 70s. We've propped it up for many years afterwards, but it's collapsing. And meanwhile, we have in all of that time, we have used the American dollar empire to manage the resources and the industry of all these countries around the world. And look at what Europe produces. You know, there's all these, you look on X and you see all of these memes about, you know, China makes all of these things, Russia makes all these things, Africa makes all these things, and Europe produces regulations. Well, part of the reason that Europe produces regulations is because the United States has been paying them off to join the American global trade system ever since its inception in 1944. So they have a long time to begin to recover from that and have their own discussion about resources, and they have a huge NIMBY problem because they have a very high density population that's stacked on top of that. So, and this is why Russia is an attractive answer to them. Russia has access to gas, has access to cheap energy, and can help them get through the political quandary of figuring out who deserves what. So Greenland is important because of the resources, but also because of the shipping lanes. And there are ice sheets on top of Greenland, but they are melting. So if they continue to melt, Greenland also becomes an attractive place. Maybe Greenland is little Mars. Elon's all focused on a planet far, far, far away, but we have technology, and we have land in Greenland. Any number of possibilities for how people could set up lives and industry there. So I think that's why Greenland was so attractive. But shipping routes is top amongst that list because Russia and the United States and Europe have been very interested in the North Atlantic, as the ice is less of an issue in freezing all of that up in the winter months. Fresh, have we swung your opinion on joining the United States for the North American Empire?
Look, I'm all for the United States of North America. I just don't think it's going to happen. I'm way more. I actually think that it's going to be a North American Union similar to the EU. I think that's the way forward. And again, I think that you're right about Trump. I think that he's saying this shit to get people's minds going, get people open to the idea, so that when he comes with a reasonable solution, they're like, oh, that makes way more sense.
Well, there's also we're not that distant in concepts of political arrangement too. And we're in some ways at a detente at the federal system in the United States. And one thing that I've long thought is a way out of that is to add to our representatives in the House and representatives in the Senate. And I think that we can do that internally in the United States. We have many territories already, Puerto Rico, states like Texas and California that have provisions for dividing up or changing, what the state could look like, and who represents them in the House of Representatives and also the Senate. And then we also have many native lands and native or tribal, how should I put this? Native tribes that have their own governments and were given sovereignty from the state in which they reside, but were promised both representation at the federal level and have never seen that representation. So, and that came to a head at the Supreme Court in 2015. And the Supreme Court said, that the Cherokees of Oklahoma were guaranteed a representative in Congress, and that representative has never been seated. So I think if the United States also begins to open up what the very static federal government has looked like for so long, it can also begin to look a little bit more attractive to have other people that join in the political discussions that are going on there. Anyway, we're well over 40 minutes. Fun conversation. Can't believe I got in the Ochota Cherokee Treaty. Always fun to drop that. And William Seward in the same episode. Grant, anything else before we close it out? Or Fresh,
No,
anything you want to close it out?
Love the discussion. It was super fun, and I was glad we could get the Cherokee piece into the show at the last minute. Kudos.
Yeah. All I really wanted to say was, I agree with you. And I think that's also a big part of Canada's history, is like recognizing and representing the Indigenous peoples here. So, yeah, I could see that making it easier to bring people to the table. But thanks for having me, guys. It's been a great conversation.
Hey, Fresh, before we go, did you want to plug the Goat Show? I love the Goat Show. I didn't tell our audience where I know you from, but I woke up this morning, I was listening to your H1B episode and chuckling and giggling as I was listening. I really enjoy what you guys have done there. Do you want to give that a plug? Tell them where they can find you.
Sure. Check out at the Goat Show Pod on everything, anywhere and everywhere. The Goat Show, the show where we celebrate and debate all things great.
And they really do. And it's funny. All right, Grant, we'll see you tomorrow.
See you guys.